By the way, we are discussing past 23 class after having our initial discussion on past 16 because normally class, the items, the qualifying assets that we've mentioned would normally end up being classified as part of your property, plant, and equipment. If you construct your own building or your factory plant, definitely the construction period would be for a substantial amount of time. Therefore, in determining the cost of your PPE, you may include the relevant borrowing cost. Now, paragraph 6 class tells you of the different items that may be considered as a borrowing cost. And definitely, they are just different forms of interest costs class. Although to simplify them for our easier recollection class, just remember them as interest. But for purposes of multiple choice question, be familiar with the enumeration provided in letter A, D, and echo. So definitely you will be asked which one is not included. So paragraph tells you the borrowing cost, the items that may be considered as a borrowing cost. And you will be asked which one is not. So letter A, D, and E will be provided in the choice. And I guess the fourth choice would be one that is not considered as a borrowing cost. And we've encountered one earlier class, the actual or imputed cost on your equity. Because again, we're only dealing with borrowing cost. So remember A, D, and E class, they should be in the choices as those that are considered as borrowing cost, while payment of dividends or equity holders should not be considered part of your borrowing cost. This is how questions are made, man. Everything are taken from the standards, but one item will just be grouped with other items that belong to the same category and make a question asking you to choose one that does not belong to the group. Now, past 23 also gives you an enumeration class as to what items may be a qualifying asset. But again, this is not an exclusive list. As long as it can meet the definition class that it necessarily takes a substantial amount of time before it reaches its intended use or eventual sale, then it can be considered as a qualifying asset. Now, a common question here, class, would be which of the following should not be considered as a qualifying asset? So you have here class inventories, manufacturing plants. Manufacturing plant is again part of your PPE. Power generation facilities, part of your PPE. Intangible assets, another kind of long-term asset. Investment properties, another kind of long-term assets. Bearer plants, which would be part of your PPE as well. But definitely all these items are long-term assets. So what would be the usual cause for errors on the part of the students? You'll recall class, some students may just remember paragraph 7 and they would say, paragraph 7 states that an inventory may be a qualifying asset. But the student forgot that if it's an inventory that is produced in large quantities and on a repetitive basis, that such kind of inventory is excluded from the application of past 23. So the important thing to remember here, class, is that indeed inventory may be a qualifying asset, but if it's an inventory that is produced in large quantities and on a repetitive basis, then past 23 will no longer be applied. Hence, no capitalization of borrowing cost. So please take note of inventories. This would be the common point of contention in whether or not you can get the question right or wrong. Other items class that are specified in the standard are with regard to financial assets and inventories that are manufactured or otherwise produced over a short period of time are not qualifying assets. Even without this being stated in the standard class, we understand this as being true because again, a qualifying asset are those that will require a substantial amount of time before it becomes ready for its intended use or sale. Next, another obvious statement class, assets that are ready for their intended use or sale when acquired are not qualifying assets. If at the date of acquisition class they are already at their intended use, location, and condition, then definitely it is not a qualifying asset. But this is how examiners are going to make this confusing, man. They would tell you that it is a building. But when you purchase the building class, the building was already completed. At the time that you acquired the building was already ready for occupancy. The question now is, considering the building took a substantial amount of time before it was finished, is that building a qualifying asset? The answer is no. Even though it took a substantial amount of time before the building was completed. When it was acquired by the purchaser, it was already ready for occupancy and thus will be considered as being ready for its intended use. Be careful with that one, class. When we talk of qualifying assets, class, the long period of time needed for it to be completed or ready, class, should be reckoned from the time that you're already in control of the asset. So if you're the one constructing it from scratch, then it's correct to say that it took a substantial amount of time for it to be completed. But if you acquired it after it was already finished, class, then definitely the long period of time should not be attributable to you, and thus you cannot claim that you have had to pay for interest during the construction of the building. I hope it makes sense to you, class. So before proceeding, class, the main takeaway from what I have just discussed, class, is that interest cost may be capitalized, may be included in the cost of an asset, class, if it pertains to a qualifying asset. And make sure by now you can provide on your own the definition of what a qualifying asset is.